Hi, Carl here for ProAV TV, and today we're taking a look at the Sony FS5 Mark II. Now, this isn't the most exciting upgrade to a camera which we've covered on the channel. I'm not going to lie to you. It's essentially exactly the same camera as the FS5 Mark I was. Sony have definitely taken the approach of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Physically, the only difference that you're going to see is the tiny little Mark II logo by the FS5 and then actually a black ND wheel on the front. Why they've painted it black for this one, I don't know, but that's really the only physical way you're going to be able to tell the difference between the two. And internally it's pretty much the same as well. It's the same sensor, all the same buttons, everything's the same, most of the same features. What they've effectively done here with the Mark II is they've neatened up the FS5. So the FS5 Mark I was released, brilliant little camera, about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, something like that. And then they kept giving it firmware updates. Sony were really good at making sure that they enabled every last little bit from that camera design. And so really the FS5 transformed from the camera it first was when it first came out into a much more powerful beast. Just before this one was released, it enabled the raw output, it enabled more high frame rate options internally, and it really changed entirely what that camera was capable of. But each one of those were paid upgrades. So with this one, Sony have neatened it. Sony have put all of those upgrades into one camera, and they've also done a few things like tweak some Colorscience profiles and stuff like that. So essentially what we're looking at here is a cleaner, neater version of the FS5 Mark I. So let's talk through what those optional upgrades that were paid upgrades with the FS5 Mark I but are now included with the FS5 Mark II, what they actually gave you. So there was one that was a high frame rate upgrade, and so that enabled 120 frames a second continuous in camera. The camera could always record slow motion, it was always pretty good at slow motion, but it was all done in bursts modes. And that's absolutely great, but it's not for every situation. So it's great to be able to choose between continuous 100 frames a second or bursts of say 240 frames a second. Those bursts can actually go as high as 960, but the quality really does drop off. But 240 looks lovely. Then there was the RAW upgrade, which is perhaps the biggest deal with this camera. This is what unlocked all of the image potential of this camera. It gives you a raw signal, raw data stream out of the SDI port to a monitor like the Odyssey Design 7Q or the Shogun Inferno from Atmos, which is what we've got connected here. Now, the Atmos ones are going to be able to record in ProRes Raw as well. So we're actually recording ProRes Raw from the FS5 in this setup. Now that can do obviously normal speed 4K, or it can do 4K up to 50 frames a second as well. It can do 2K and it can do high frame rates. So it can do 4-second bursts of 100 frames a second in 4K or continuous 2K slow-mo at up to 240 frames a second, all in RAW, and so ProRes RAW with the Shogun Inferno, which is just lovely, lovely quality. One thing Sony have definitely changed with the Mark II is the Colorscience. So they've said that they've tweaked the color profile in standard normal picture profiles, so that's PP1 or if picture profiles are off. And that's been inspired a little bit by the look of the Venice camera, their flagship full frame cinema camera. What it's done to the Mark II is given it a much nicer highlight roll off and much nicer skin tones and more accurate colours in general. In these side-by-side tests, if you look at the green of the trees behind and you look at the skin tone on Dan, they're definitely much more natural and realistic on the Mark II than they were on the Mark I, especially the sky behind him. So it's the same sensor. All they've done there is tweak the data values of those gamma curves that they've installed into this camera. What Sony did say though is that there wasn't any difference in normal log recording, but I did do a side-by-side comparison in S-Log3, and I was actually surprised that the skin tones did seem a little bit nicer in the Mark II's files. Now, these weren't direct side-by-side comparisons. We only had one lens for the two cameras, so we did one shot with one camera, then the other one. So there could have been lighting differences, there could have been all sorts of things. But we did do several of these tests, and they were consistently ever so slightly nicer on the FS5 Mark II, which is something I really wasn't expecting to see at all. So I think what we do really know is, especially if you're using standard picture profile, but potentially overall as well, the colours you get from the FS5 Mark II should be much nicer than you're used to seeing with the FS5 Mark I. It's very tempted to feel slightly underwhelmed by the FS5 Mark II. I mean, it didn't really add any new fantastic headline features, any major upgrades to what we were already used to with the FS5 Mark I, but I think that's sort of slightly missing the point in some ways. I mean, yes, they didn't add anything new exciting, but the FS5 is still a fantastic camera. It still holds up really well against the competition. I mean, if you're looking for something that is a sort of all-purpose camera, maybe for corporate work, something like that, where you have to be so varied in what it is you do, this makes a lot of sense still. It gives you all the slow motion upgrades. You can enable higher image quality with the RAW output. You can strip it right down to a small handheld little setup with servo zooms and variable NDs, all that sort of stuff, which is just fantastic for anyone running around and doing run and gun work. So it is a really nice, neat little package for an all-purpose video camera. Why would Sony change it too much? I mean, this is a brilliant formula for a camera, and a lot of people are still interested and very happy with the FS5, and I don't blame them at all. It's a great camera, even if it is much the same as the FS5 Mark I. But let us know what you think of the FS5 Mark II down in the comment section. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the cameras. Is there something that you were wishing that they would update which they didn't, or is the FS5 still the perfect camera for you? Let us know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.